Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2.
Alright, Mackenzie, we need you to sing real loud.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 3. It looks like it's on.
Yeah, the green light's on. Cord's plugged in.
Testing, 1. Testing, 1, 2. Yep, they got A. They're having technical difficulties. Nope, not right now. Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2. There we are. All right. I get all the singers on the stage. We're going to go ahead and start singing. You want to sing, Daddy?
Alright, Dee Dee. Feeding our child.
I have a policy against speaking only female.
Mackenzie's up here.
On the stage.
No, we're going to sing first. Who's dancing around this? Can you do it?
Nobody's coming through for me.
Do you want to go?
Sing anything high. Give her a mic. Give that girl a mic.
All right, we're going to start Blue Skies and Rainbows. Blue skies and rainbows and sunbeams from heaven are all I can see. When the Lord is living in me, I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. Green grass and flowers all blooming in springtime are works of the Master. I live for each day. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. Tall mountains, green valleys, the beauty surrounds me, all makes me aware of the one who made it all. I know that Jesus is well and alive today. He makes his home in my heart. Nevermore will I be all alone, since he promised me that we never would part. All right, we're singing Everything's All Right. Everything's all right in my Father's house. Whoa, in my Father's house. Whoa, in my Father's house. Everything's all right in my Father's house, where there's joy, joy, joy. Come and go with me to my Father's house. Whoa, to my Father's house. Whoa, to my Father's house. Come and go with me to my Father's house, where there's joy, joy, joy. Jesus is the way to my Father's house. Whoa, to my Father's house. Whoa, to my Father's house. Jesus is the way to my Father's house, where there's joy, joy, joy. There are many rooms in my Father's house. Whoa, in my Father's house. Whoa, in my Father's house. There are many rooms in my Father's house, where there's joy, joy, joy. Right, we're going to sing Leaning on the Everlasting Arm. And then we are going to have one request. Think about what you want to sing. I do not have a guitar. No guitar songs. What of fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Lean, lean on Jesus, safe and secure from all alarms. Lean on Jesus, lean on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how sweet to walk in this pilgrim way, leaning on the everlasting arms. Oh, how bright the path grows from day to day, leaning on the everlasting arms. Lean on Jesus, lean on Jesus, safe and secure from all alarms. Lean on Jesus, lean on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. What have I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I have blessed peace with my Lord so near, leaning on the everlasting arms. Lean on Jesus, lean on Jesus, safe and secure from all alarms. Lean on Jesus, lean on Jesus, leaning on the everlasting arms. Right, what is our request? Amazing grace. Let's do it. Amazing grace. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come.
Perfect. All right. Happy Wednesday. This thing's on, right? Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. My name is Leah. I'm a campus intern here, and I'm doing our announcements for July. I almost said August. All right. Prayer requests, just keep praying for Jenny Richards and all that. A couple of announcements. Again, we have the World Discipleship Conference in just less than a year, July 2nd through 5th, 2020 in Orlando. So that's world, that's lots of people coming in. So register for that, get that figured out if you want to go. There's a marriage conference September 14th through 15th of this year in Daytona. There's more information in the foyer if you're interested in that. Our Wednesday night class to learn more of how to study the Bible with people is picking back up again tonight, 8:45 to 9:30 p.m. here in this room, I'm assuming. So if you're interested in learning how to study the Bible with people more effectively, feel free to stick around. Okay, if anyone is willing to help Lou paint her new house this Saturday, July 13th, anytime after 12 p.m., please let Lou know. Where'd Lou go? Oh, she's right back there. So just let her know if you're able to come and help out. Her parents were impressed and thankful for the help last weekend. Shout out to Lisa Roden, Leah, Jorana, and PJ. Jorana and PJ aren't here tonight. But yeah, it's lots of fun. If you want to come and help serve, just let Lou know. That's this Saturday after 12 p.m. Are there any other announcements? Anything I missed? Okay. Any birthdays?
We miss Caroline Mueller's.
Ooh. Caroline. And Les. And ooh, so we're catching up. Okay. All right, so you can say your name, your age if you would like, and we can leave it up. Okay. Alrighty, go ahead.
Happy birthday.
What's your name?
Sue.
Sue. Okay. So Sue. What? Oh. What's your name and your age if you want to share it? Gavin and 12. What? Okay, anyways. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Ooh. Leslie. Josh. Okay. Okay. So we have Sue, Gavin, Caroline, Leslie, and Josh. You ready? All right. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Sue, Gavin, Caroline, Leslie, and Josh. Happy birthday to you. Woo! Amazing. Okay. Any anniversaries? Good. Good. You want to stand up? There we go. We have a surrogate. Okay. 9 years. Okay. Okay. So, and your names and partners' names. Valerie and Jason. Tiffany and Matt. Okay. So Tiffany and Matt, Valerie and Jason. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary, Tiffany and Matt, Valerie and Jason. Happy anniversary to you. Right. Awesome. So we'll now have a fellowship break. Kids can go back to their classes, and then we'll have our class out here tonight. Perfect.
If everyone would go ahead and get seated, we'll get started back up. If you want to, turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 11. 1 Corinthians 11. All right, so Sunday we started 1 Corinthians chapter 11. And then just to let you know, this coming Sunday, we're going to be going back into 1 Corinthians 10, starting in verse 14. So if you want to prepare for that this coming Sunday. But this past Sunday, we did 1 Corinthians 11. And we just felt like the flow would go better because the following week we're going to do 1 Corinthians 11, 17, where it talks more about the Lord's Supper. So we're going to talk about the Lord's Supper for a couple weeks in a row after this class tonight. So I brought up this topic, or actually I didn't bring this up, Paul brought this topic up, and then we talked about it this past Sunday. And I'm just going to read through this and give you a quick, really fast overview because I think several people have been gone. We had our lowest totals, I think, the last couple of weeks with people going on vacation and everything like that we've had in a while. I'm hoping people are having a great time with family. That's the most important, good opportunity for us this summer. But make sure you keep digging into the Word because when we're in Corinthians, we want you to keep digging into it. Even if you're not here, get on the podcast, listen to those things so we can stay together, and hopefully it really is beneficial for you. So I'm going to start in verse 31 of 1 Corinthians 10. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everybody in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. Follow my example as I follow the examples of Christ. Having read that, this is the key section, I think, for the next several chapters. Those words right there talking about Paul has a priority, and it's not Paul. Paul's priority is God's church. Paul's priority are the people that he's reaching out to. And we have to keep that in mind no matter what we're doing. How is what I'm doing impacting the church? How is what I'm going to do impact the message of Christ? How do people see Christ through me? Paul's really trying to get us to see this. And that's why he says, even as I try to please everybody in every way, he's not willing to sin for other people, but he's trying to make people see Christ in him in every way that he can. And so he will adapt in some ways. As we've read, he talks about the things that he says to win as many as possible back in 1 Corinthians 9, that he would try to become all things to all men, but there's certain areas where he draws a line. And we're going to kind of go back and forth through some of those things. In 1 Corinthians 11, we come into one of the more controversial sections in the Bible, actually, depending on who you are. And I'm going to read through this. We're not going to spend any more time on it right now because we talked about it Sunday. But I hope that you will listen to the podcast if you have questions about that. And we're going to talk about this principle a lot tonight. So it says, next, I praise you for remembering me in everything and for holding to the teachings just as I passed them on to you. Now I want you to realize that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of every woman is man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered dishonors his head, and every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered dishonors her head. It is just as though her head were shaved. If a woman does not cover her head, she should have her hair cut off. And if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut off or shaved off, she should cover her head. A man ought not to cover his head, since he is the image and glory of God. But the woman is the glory of man. For man did not come from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for woman, but woman for man. For this reason, and because of the angels, the woman ought to have a sign of authority on her head. There was a lot to cover, and we did that last week. And in your family groups, you can talk more about that. But I want to just give you a really quick overview. In the culture that they're talking about, if you did not wear a veil, it was a disgrace. It was a disgrace for several reasons. One is, it was basically, if you were a married person, it was telling other people that you were available or that you were dishonoring your husband. So this was a bad thing to do for a Christian. Second thing it would be, if you were going to the old idol worship, when they would go and we have these orgies we talked about in the worship, in the services that they would do, not in Christianity, but in the pagan culture. If a woman took off her veil, it meant that she was available. And there was another group of people who were known as the shorn women. They were the women who were prostitutes. Not all prostitutes had shorn hair, but they would shave their head or cut their hair really closely. And this was again, for a Christian woman to start following this pattern would bring disgrace on either her husband or the church or whatever situation. That's a quick overview of that section. And again, I hope you can listen to that if you want to dig into that more. But it brings up an issue that we talked a lot about in my family group, and I feel like this was something that we should talk about. And that is, how do you know when something is a custom to a land versus a literal application? In this situation, does this mean that from now on, all the women in here, if they're really going to be following Christ, should wear a veil? You know? And in some churches, it was taught that that should happen. And so I want you to think about, what if we all started saying all you ladies had to wear veils to do that? Would that impact the church in a positive or a negative way? Yeah, it would be a negative thing, all right? Now, if it was our culture, that would be a different thing. And there's certain cultures right now in the world right now where that's what you do. And if we were part of that culture, we would need to honor that culture, okay? So how do you know whether something's a biblical principle or whether it's not? And that's what I want to talk about tonight, and hopefully get you to think a little bit about this. I'm going to bring up a few controversial subjects and try to address them as we get going. But when you think about this, there's obviously a cultural thing for sure going on, and you got to think, what are the principles? What does God want us to get from this? Okay? So I'm going to give you some basic principles just to start off with, and that is, what does God, when you read a section of the Bible, whether it's this one or something else, what does God want to communicate with us, his people? For example, why did he include it in the Bible? Because there's no accidental things in the Bible. Everything is deliberate. So God didn't put this in here for us necessarily to wear veils. If he didn't do that, then what did he put it in there for? And that's the way you need to look at the scriptures. Every time you read it, what is the message that God is trying to convey? What is his point? Why does Paul include it in there? There's so many things he could have put in here, I'm sure, with the Corinthian church. Why does he put that in there? And that's what we should get out of that. If the veils don't apply to us, there's a principle in here that does. And we need to be looking at the scriptures, and that's what we did talk about this past Sunday. And it's really important. So this is one critical thing. God wrote what he wrote in this Bible. If we don't believe that, we're in trouble. Because Christianity has no foundation if the Bible isn't real. So it's really critical that you take that mindset in your own study. And here's where we run into trouble. And we're going to come, let's go to Romans chapter 12. I want to show you something. Romans chapter 12. These principles are going to hopefully help guide you as you run into these different things, because there's things in the Bible, you know, the Bible doesn't talk about microwaves, it doesn't talk about cell phones, it doesn't talk about the internet. So how do you deal with those things? Does that mean there's no application? We don't learn anything about those? Doesn't talk about automobiles, doesn't talk about speeding tickets, nothing. So how do you deal with those? You know, how does that apply to us? So Romans chapter 12 says this: "Therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." A great verse that I want to focus in on verse 2. "Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." This concept of conforming to the pattern, each one of you, myself included, have been raised in this culture or some other culture and come into this country. When you're raised in that culture, you learn to look at things from the way those people look at things, whether it's American culture, Hispanic culture, in Latin America. Like when we go to Chile, they have a different culture than we do. It's funny, just a simple thing. When you get on a bus in Chile, at least when I've been on the bus, you know, if you're get on a bus in America, there's an empty seat, there's an empty row, you go sit in the empty row, right? But not there. There could be a whole bunch of empty rows, they'll come and sit right next to you. And it's like talking to you in Spanish, and then you're in trouble, you know. And I was like, see, you know. No, but really, it's just different. It's just, that's what they do. It stands out. I mean, there's just different things in different cultures that everybody does. And you learn to conform to that culture. And it's not necessarily wrong to conform to that culture, but maybe sometimes it is. And our culture has some weaknesses. Our culture's a lot like Corinth. They're caught up in things and money. They're caught up in sexuality. That's why we chose this second, because Corinthian culture is a lot like American culture. Yeah. And so with that mindset, And with what we're raised in, we get sensitized to certain sins. We accept certain things. We get hard to other things. So we have to make the standard our Bible. And one of the things about doing that is that means you have to think. And when you think about the scriptures, they are not written always black and white like we want it to be. This is the way it is in every situation. It's not. Think about this. How many times does Jesus ask people questions? All the time. Why? Does he need you to answer them? He wants you to be a thinking human. He wants you to think. These are principles in the scriptures. And some of them are obvious black and white things. Yes, you do this, and no, you don't. But some things are principles like this head covering thing. What does it really mean to us? We all should wear football helmets? You know? I mean, you start thinking of different things. And so you have to think, how do you apply the scriptures to your life? You're supposed to think. But you got to look at it from the biblical perspective, not your culture's perspective first. Then the point is you can accommodate to that culture as long as it doesn't contradict the biblical principles. And you've got to learn to think that way. And we'll bring up some examples about that in just a few minutes. So first we think about, what does God want to communicate with us? Why did he write this? And then the other thing you really need to start learning to do is look at, what is the setting? What is the culture? What are these people like? Why is Paul writing to them? What's the purpose of this letter? You have to really start to dig into your Bible more than just reading a verse and say, I like that verse. That's great, and it's a good thing to do. But if you really want to understand what's being written, you have to understand the culture that it's being written to. What were the people doing? That's why we spent time talking when we started the book of Corinthians, what was going on, what the culture was, what's happening. We'll keep bringing that up because it really, really matters a lot. So he wants you to think, he wants you to understand. And then a couple more things I want you to think about. If you run into a controversial situation, you say, I don't know what this means. What's the first thing that you should do is look at what the Bible says in other places about it. Okay? So if it's talking about head coverings and talk about the men wearing, they shouldn't wear a head covering. But if you go back in the Old Testament, there was times when they were supposed to. All right? They wore a prayer shawl. And the high priest would wear a hat. So when you go back and look at those things, that doesn't make sense. If you take that, there's obviously a cultural application at different times. So that's why if you look through the scriptures and see if there's different applications at different times, then it's more culturally related. And you got to look at the principles. So I'm trying to get you to think about this. So just you read something you don't understand, the first thing you do isn't panic. First thing you say, what else does the Bible say about it? What does God want me to learn from this? What is the principle underlying what he's saying? And then we can understand it more effectively. Another really important quality, if the scriptures talk about something and they say this is a bad thing in the Old Testament, and they say it's a bad thing in the New Testament, is it cultural? No. That's 2,000 years or more. That means it's a principle of God. If he says, don't do this in the Old Testament, don't do it in the New Testament, it's not something you can say, oh, this doesn't apply to us. Man, it's literally, you're talking thousands of years, that same principle was hold solid. I don't think we can modify it in this century. It's not our job. All right, and as you're looking at that, if you're reading something in the New Testament and it quotes the Old Testament as a basis for its belief, it's the same principle. That's right. All right, Jesus does that a lot. So when the Bible's quoting the Old Testament, in the New Testament, they're giving you some background information that you need to look at. Don't just say, back and read it. Figure out what it says, and you'll be able to understand these principles. Now, I know I'm telling you, you have to think more to get into it, but if you want to get into your Bible and understand principles and be able to deal with the conflict of our society and figure out what do I have to conform to and what do I not need to conform to, you need to do that. Okay? You really do need to do that. You need to teach your children to do that. You need to get them to understand this is the foundation of our faith. The principles in this book are what we live by, not what the world teaches us. All right. And then let's go on to this. I want to talk. So the veil issue is not part of our culture. However, the principle of submission, of honor, of honoring God, of bringing glory to the church is a huge issue. It's a principle. That means, and we talked about this Sunday, that no matter where you go or whatever you do or whoever you talk to, you should bring honor to God. period. What you say, and that's what Paul's telling them. Don't wear something that's going to hurt the church of God. Don't do it. And he's trying to get us to think that way. So, yeah, it doesn't really apply to us to wear the veils, but there's a lot of things that we can compromise on, and people can think and say, does he go to church at CrossWay? I thought she was helping with the church. They say, that doesn't make sense. We don't want to live like that. We have to represent Christ, and that's what Paul is telling the church. Don't conform to the evil part of our society. Don't let people think that. Don't create that picture. So, now, to make it more complicated, problems occur when the church tries to create new rules to protect us from going too far. All right? Does this sound like any group in the Bible? The Pharisees, that's what they did, right? That's what Jesus was so mad about them. They'd make new rules so you wouldn't sin. So if it was going to be a sin to walk, a quarter of a mile, they'd say, you can't walk a mile. They would just make these big fences around those. For example, how many of you were taught when you were growing up that it was a sin to dance? You can raise your hand. Anybody ever learned that, a sin to dance? Well, the older people were, most of you heard that when you were growing up. All right. Why did they say that? Just because they hate dancing? No. Because they thought it was too sexual. That's really where it came from. I'm sure that today's dancing wouldn't bother them at all, right? I will say this. Be wise about how you dance. We don't make a rule about dancing. When we were, in the last 15 years, this question has been asked to me a lot of times. Okay, so we're having this pool party. Is one piece or two piece? I'm like, I never wear two pieces. So I always just say one. But no, the truth is, I never would say. Because I've been around enough, I've seen one pieces that are way less than two pieces sometimes. I'm not the cloth measurer. I don't do that, all right? What's the principle? That's what we live by, okay? And so you got to think about it. If you go and you're wearing a whole bubble around you, people are going to think, that's really weird. Is that what they do at that church? So it's figuring out how to make that work, right? And so you have to be wise. When one of the churches that we were with a long time ago, they used to not let men and women get in the same swimming pool together. That was called mixed bathing. True story. True story. I one time, this is really funny, he may listen to this and he'll crack up, but I one time when I was up in Alabama, I had just become a Christian, and I decided I was going to run over to my friend's house, it was about 3 miles away, and mow his yard while he was gone. I thought that was a good thing. I'm from Florida, so ran over there in my nice shorts, mowed the yard. He came out and talked to me when he got home. He came give me a drink, and he says, we don't wear shorts around here in the church. I'm like, really? I said, I live in Florida. We wear shorts to everything. And he says, no, that's not what we do. Now it's just funny because he laughs about it too. Or women wearing pants. I remember Allison telling me one time that you weren't allowed to wear pants in her church because that was bad. And so she had this pantsuit, and the top came down to about right there. And the pant, if she wore the pants, it was bad, but if she wore the top without the pants, it was good. I'm like, there was something mixed up about that, all right? No, really, my point is sometimes we make these rules because we don't want to sin instead of thinking what is best, what's going to bring honor to God. And we don't make the rules here. If the Bible makes the rule, we really try to do it because we want you to think. And if someone doesn't feel, if you don't feel good about something you're doing, you ask about it. If you think you shouldn't do something, you probably shouldn't. And if you're not sure, get some advice. Really. So what about alcohol? How many of you have heard that alcohol was a sin? Growing up, I heard it was. My brother was into a church. Donnie went to church one time, and the guy said, if Jesus drank a sip of wine, he's not my Savior. The Bible clearly says he drank wine. So that's how people get so hard on certain things. We know that they drank wine that had alcohol in it at the Lord's Supper because people got drunk. We're going to read that in 1 Corinthians 11. I'm not saying it's good. My point is we don't need to react in a way. Think about this. Did the Corinthian church do that? Did they overreact? And you look at it and you think, no, but yes, they did. What was the problem with the sexual relationship with the married couples where they were saying, maybe they shouldn't have sex. We're trying to make that rule. And Paul addressed them, no, you're obligated when you're married to have sex with each other. That's what you do. All right? So my point of bringing these things up is, guys, we need to think about our culture and the things that are going on. And we need to make sure that when we're doing these different things, what does the Bible say about them when you're confronted with these challenges? Because you can clearly look in the alcohol situation and think, it's not a sin to do that. Now, for some people, it is a sin. You have to know that. If it's going to take over your life, don't do it. And so this whole sexuality thing is a huge issue. Okay, remember, many of you were taught this in your background, that Mary could not have ever had sex because that was a sin, right? The Bible doesn't teach that. But in certain churches, you learn that. And that's not biblical. And so the churches sometimes get mixed up. The Bible is our foundation, not the culture around us. We can't let the customs define us. So I want to talk about a few things. I'm just going to bring a couple of these issues up, really simple ones first. And there's a lot of different kind of sins in our life. There's a lot of sexual sins in our life. All of us are tempted by something, typically sexually. And is homosexuality a custom or a principle? Well, in the Old Testament, it's clear that it's not okay. The New Testament is clear that it's not okay. Is it okay? No. Does that mean we don't love people in that situation? No. No different than anyone else. And all sins are the same, right? But the point is, we love each other, but we can't say it's just a cultural thing. It's not. You know? And so that's an easier principle, honestly. Our society argues about it, but it's really not really arguable if they believe the Bible is the Word of God. It's really not. Again, don't treat anybody different for any sin. We love everybody, and we want them to be a part of our body here. But still, we have to deal with those things. But I'm going to get a little more complicated. What about marijuana? The Bible certainly doesn't mention it. You know, I've never read anything about marijuana in the Bible. Is there anything that even could apply to it? And the answer is yes, but you know what it is and where it is. And why do you do it? For example, what if you're prescribed marijuana because you have a seizure disorder? Is it a sin? In my opinion, its answer is no. All right? The Bible doesn't clearly say that, but a lot of medicines have potential side effects and negative things if they're used in the wrong way. All right? What if you're using marijuana to get high? Is that a sin? And if so, why would you think so? What's the sin of alcohol? Is me going home and having a glass of wine a sin? No. What if I had 10 glasses? The Bible would say that would be a sin, right? I don't know the numbers. I don't play the number game. You know when you have too much. I don't police anyone's alcohol intake. But if I see someone drinking too much, I might talk to them about it. But the point is that what makes alcohol a problem is not the alcohol itself, it's the way it's used sometimes. All right? Biblically, that's true. Talks about beer and wine, both in the Old Testament and New Testament. Not in the New Testament, I don't think the beer is in, but Old Testament's both. So, but the point about that stuff is, how do you know? People say, well, how many drinks can I have? 2.5, 2, 1. Again, I'm not the police. You know. You have a relationship with God, and you say, I've had too much. Then don't do that. You know. Another little caveat to that, if you're driving in Chile, don't drink any alcohol because their threshold is really, really low. All right? Like if you have a glass of wine, you drive, your problem, and it's not good. All right? In our country, there's a little more liberality to that. But the point is, you have to, if you can't make a good choice, then don't do it. All right? But when you think about that, the problem with alcohol isn't having the alcohol. It's when you're taking it to alter your brain. When you're trying to get high with marijuana, that's what you're doing. That's the principle that's in the Old and New Testament about alcohol. It's there. I mean, I read through it just this last 2 days, just making sure these things were true. So that brings up narcotics. So what about narcotics? Should I take narcotics just because I'm stressed? What if my leg's broken? So there's a place for it, right? So the point about that is we have to take the principles of the Bible and think, is there something similar to it that I can compare it to and make it work? All right? And make it last. No, the Bible doesn't say anything about narcotics either, but right now in my office, it's a huge deal. Over the last year, we've had new rules. I can only prescribe narcotics for a certain number of days, 3 days. Unless I do surgery. Used to be I could prescribe it for 30 days. Why? Because so many people were dying because of it. And so they said, we got to control this. The death rate is unbelievable. So we started monitoring and cutting it down. It's still issues, but my point is that there's drugs of abuse, and so you have to be careful. A lot of things can be done there. If you're taking medicine, make sure you're taking it for what it's for. All right? If you start using it for other things, then it's not the right thing. All right? So that one kind of makes sense, I think, to most of us if we do that. You might want to argue because of this or that, but you got to be honest with yourself would Jesus say that it was right? That's a really important thing. Would Jesus say that it's right? So I'm going to bring up even a more controversial thing, and that is abortion. I didn't know this until I started doing some looking up on this. Whoopi Goldberg made a big stand about abortion isn't mentioned in the Bible. And is that true or not? The answer is, technically, that is true. But does it talk about the issue in some form or another? The answer is yes, quite a bit, actually. I want to talk to you a little bit about that. All right. I'm trying to give you a way to think about these controversial issues and go back and say, what does the Bible really say? Is this, what's really happening? So, again, this is an interesting, wrong page, sorry about that. So, is there anything you can think of in the Bible that has a similarity to abortion as it's practiced in America today or in the world today? What do you think?
The worship of some of the foreign gods like Molech and Baal, where they would burn children in fire.
Okay.
Even infants.
Nate brings up exactly what I think is really a valid thing is when babies were just born sometimes, they would take that baby and sacrifice it to Molech or Baal, all right? And even some of the Christian or the Jewish people got caught up in this stuff. What does God think about that? He is deeply disturbed. I mean, deeply disturbed. And to the point where he uses words really, really strong like hatred and things like that about what was happening. I will tell you this. I don't think that you're going to read anything in the Old or New Testament that God says that he hates, that's okay to do at any time. I don't. That doesn't make sense to me. All right, so, but God is intensely opposed to that. It's bad. Even if you go read Ezekiel 16, it's a really interesting story about what would happen to some babies. They would be born. They didn't have the ability to abort them like we do in the same way. They would just throw the baby without cleaning them, umbilical cord, placenta, they would throw them in the dump. That's pretty common, actually. That's the word for Gehenna, hell, is describing that kind of thing, actually. But what happened is, Israel, he says this is kind of graphic and gross, but he tells Israel that they were a nation. They were like a little baby that was thrown and left in there, and he went and rescued them and raised them as his child. And he's just wanting to show them how much he loved them and how desperate they needed him, and obviously he's disturbed by that concept. This is not a concept that God takes lightly, and I think it's really important. There's a lot of scriptures on this. Then there's the debate about, is a baby really alive until they're born? Does the Bible address this? And the answer is yes, in the Old and New Testament. In Exodus 20:21, it talks about the exact thing, about a baby, a woman who is hit. She's pregnant and people are fighting and hurt the baby, actually. And it talks about the baby being a living being. And so it's a real thing, and his addressing injuring the baby is life for life, eye for eye. He said the baby is a real being, living creature, And then obviously the great story in Luke chapter 1, verse 41. If you haven't thought about this, it's really, really a neat story. Remember, John the Baptist, he's in Elizabeth, and she's pregnant. She's 6 months pregnant. And Mary comes to her, and what happens? The baby hears her voice, John the Baptist, and leaps for joy. Baby's alive, can hear, can react, has feelings. I don't know how that worked. But I do know if you sing to a baby, they'll start moving around different things. I do know they hear you. And so my point about that is a lot of the things we have controversy about in our culture, in our customs as a nation, are dividing and doing all these kind of things. I'm not doing this to attack anybody or anything, but the point is the Bible does talk about them, but not in the same way because they didn't have the same tools to do things. But I will tell you abortion was practiced in bad ways, and then another way it was commonly done is through drugs. They would typically see the witch doctor kind of concept, and they would give them drugs that would cause you to abort the baby. This in the New Testament, in the Greek, is called pharmakia. And when you see the word witchcraft, that's what they're referring to. The word is pharmakia. And the reason why is it wasn't, the witch doctors didn't just do that for babies. They also did that for mind-altering substances. So that was called witchcraft, for them to take medicine that altered their mind. And the Bible is extremely strong against the use of pharmakia. Now, some groups have said he's against the use of pharmacy. Those are not, they come from the same root, but they're not the same word. The point is he's talking about people who were doing bad things with medicine, including in that is mind-altering drugs and abortion. So, and that's in there several different times. So I bring those things up to tell you, yes, there's a lot of controversial things. And no, I'm not going to go and start screaming at people and doing things like that. The point is, though, the Bible is clear about things through principles and not necessarily always specific things. So when you do run into these things, you look at the Bible and say, what does the Bible teach on this? All right? And don't be afraid. If you look up the word marijuana, it isn't going to be in there. It's just not. All right? But you look up other things and you think about how they, is there something similar? Do we have a principle that I can make this decision on? And I'm telling you, most of the things in our life, the principles are there. We can't just say, well, it's not in there, I don't have to do it. That's not really, the Bible was given to you to use it to think, to live, to learn a pattern of life, to conform to the pattern of Christ, not to the pattern of the world, okay? So having said that, I'm going to open up for questions in just a second. And then I want to give you a few, well, I'll do that, and then in the end, I've got a few more questions for you to ask yourself. When you come up along these things, you're not sure how to interpret them or how to apply them, I'm going to try to give you a few things that will help, in addition to what we've already talked about. So Josh had a question. He was raising his hand in the back. Okay. So Josh, it's a great point is when you're asking a question, is it really what you want to do, or is it really what God wants to do? Because a lot of times when we start playing around and say, well, I really want to do this, so I'm going to find a way to fit it into my life, right? And I'll find the verse that supports my belief. That's not the way that we should follow the scriptures. That's the kind of problem Paul was confronting. It's not a selfish interpretation. It's a godly interpretation. And I'm telling you, it's really hard always to be that way, because we have things we like and things we want. And it's easy sometimes to put the wrong things in the the wrong position. Okay? So questions about any of this stuff. I know I brought up a lot of things. I did that on purpose to try to show that it's a broad spectrum. It wasn't trying to address a certain issue. But these issues in our society are big questions, and people argue about them. And I think as Christians, we should know whether we're getting caught up in the wrong argument or whether we're using the principles of Christ when we talk about it. And I'm not going to argue with people about it, because unless they have the same belief I do about Christ, they're not going to follow that. So I can't enforce someone to follow the Bible, but I can enforce it for me. And I can do what I know is right, and I can try to show people love and show them why I believe what I do believe. but I can't enforce other people to follow something they don't even believe in. So you can say, well, the Bible says it, and if they're not following it, it doesn't matter. You know, that's not a tool that's going to make a good discussion to them. So you just have to know that. All right, so questions about these concepts? Casey?
Not a question, but I think whenever you make a decision about something, I think something you also have to think about is whether, like, the law of the land, since we also have to follow, like, the law of the land, because we're under that.
Okay, Casey brings up the law of the land issue. So if we make a decision to do something, we got to make sure that the law of the land. Now, here's where it gets tricky, all right? So we'll do the marijuana thing, all right? So if you're in Tallahassee, as far as I know, unless you're prescribed, it's illegal. Isn't that right? I think that's right, okay? It's illegal, okay? So, and you're in Colorado, it doesn't matter if it's prescribed or not. You can just go get it, right? So because I was in Colorado, I mean, the law of the land says, hey, Chris, go for it. I should do it. The Bible trumps the law of the land everywhere, okay? So you have to do what you know the Scriptures teach, not necessarily what you want to do. You got to do, what am I doing what the Scripture teaches? That's the principle that we have to live by. Because God's rules are disciples' rules. They're the same. Now, I know we make mistakes in all of them, but we don't want to use that as an excuse to do what's wrong, you know? All right, so there was another hand that was up. Troy. Same question.
I wasn't saying it that way. I was saying, like, if there's a law that says you can't do something, you also have to look at it that way. Like, okay.
Casey, I was with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I didn't spend much time on that because if the law says I'm not supposed to do something in Florida, like the marijuana, I shouldn't do it legally. All right. But I was just saying we can flip it the other way when I go to Colorado because Luke was out there, went out there a lot, right? And so now I go to South Bend. I don't know what the rule is in South Bend, you know. But my point is that you have to apply the Scriptures, and Casey's point is exactly right. If the law of the land says not to do something, I'm not supposed to do it. Okay? Troy.
Kind of go along with that. Isn't that where separation of church and state comes in? Because that can be a little controversial. Like, for example, like the law, like you have federal, like say that the Constitution they had in it that recognizes like gay marriage and it has benefits. Like just because like if that would be okay to like say if someone were to approach you, like you had a friend like, hey, Chris, I trust you. I want you to marry us, and obviously like if you're like, hey, like I appreciate you, but because of what the Bible says, I can't do that. And then
No. Yeah. The question is, when you apply the Scriptures as you do, say that first part you said again, Troy, just to make sure I'm saying it right.
like separation of
The separation of church and state. Separation of church and state is a political thing. It has nothing to do with the church. Okay? We're going to follow the Scriptures regardless of what the state says, period. That's what we do. Yes?
So what if the law of the land said, if you're a doctor, you cannot refuse a patient's choice to have an abortion, but you spiritually have a conviction that you are not going to perform an abortion on anybody, but the law of the land says you cannot deny that person's abortion. You
Okay.
just lose your job?
Okay, so Gatlin brings up a question. Let's say that I'm in gynecology and obstetrics, which I am not, okay? However, there was a time when I was, and there was a rumor that they were going to make us do abortions even if we said it was against our conviction. And I don't know if that's happened, but I think it's been tried to happen in some places. So what should I do as a disciple? I wouldn't do it. Period. What if they took my license away? Fine, I'll do something else. That's what you have to do. I just wouldn't do it. Now, I don't think that they're at that state now, that position now, although I don't know about our world. Yeah. Caroline? Yes. Okay, Caroline brings up the issue of alcohol, or this concept of where for some people it's wrong to do it, okay? Because it's just going to hurt their life and it's going to take over. And so for them, they shouldn't do it, all right? And for the person who is in a position where, they think it's okay, then, what do you do at different times? I'll give you kind of an overview of my view on that. If I'm with a person who I know struggles with alcohol, I won't drink around them. I don't pretend that I don't, I don't think that that's the right thing either. Second is, I feel like if I am with a person, if I'm with a person I don't know, I'm really cautious about drinking alcohol around them. And I think that's really important because I don't want to put people in a bad position so that it causes them a problem. I think that we have to look at people. But if my conviction is shaky and I'm not sure whether I should do it or not, don't. Really. If you're not sure how you feel about it, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to do something you don't feel good about. Study it out. Get some advice. But if someone tells you, yeah, it's okay to drink and pushes you to drink, that's not the right appropriate thing either. And I don't know if I'm answering the question, Caroline. Did I do it?
Yeah, it's more so the thought of when people say, well, this is right for me, and this is not right for me.
Okay.
How can you have things that are different for people, like, almost like, where is the truth?
Okay. Okay, so the question is, what if this is right for me and this other person said this is right for me? And sometimes it's that way. And that's okay. Because each one of us has an individual relationship with God. And I think, but again, we have to be sensitive about each other and know that if I'm around certain people, whether for or against, I just need to be aware of it. I don't need to, if I have to have it, then I have a problem. And I think that you play that with each situation. But if you're going to a restaurant and you order some alcohol and someone else sees you, I don't pretend to play that game. Honestly, I'm open about it. I just tell them, yes, I drink alcohol. And I don't think we should ever pretend. But it might be wrong for other people. And so if you're not sure, ask a person. John, you had a question.
What you're saying, Paul talks about just because you can do it doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And there's also a warning about causing others to stumble.
Right.
Which is also, well, I can do it, but if it's going to bother you, it's that deep.
Right.
You need or not. So just because you can doesn't mean you should.
John's bringing up the point, just because you can, you shouldn't, doesn't mean you should, or that concept. And we do have rights, but we don't have to exercise those rights. Here's the thing is, going back to the thinking, you're supposed to think. I mean, and we really do, and Caroline, you're not doing this wrong, but we really do want to say, this is the line, and this is right, and this is wrong. And the Bible doesn't do it, but we want that so bad. But it's not, God doesn't want that for us. He wants you to act out of love and relationships. That's what he wants. There was a hand back here. Tab. I'm sorry, there's a couple different hands. I'll try to get to them. Okay. Go ahead, Tab.
I think also, it also says, if at all possible, live in peace with all men.
Right.
And a lot of times when those kind of situations come up, that's not time for controversy. You respect somebody else's
Right.
sexual, that's not only valid. Respect that.
Tab brings up great scripture. If at all possible, live in peace with all men. That's our goal. I mean, we want people to go to heaven, And so you got to think about other people before yourself and all these things. That's what Paul's trying to teach them to do. And that in the back there was Kim and then Sam. Right. Okay, the concept is something mastering your life, and if something has that control of you, that it's controlling your life, then that's a problem for you. It can be anything. It doesn't. We use alcohol a lot because that's one of those areas, but it could be your cell phone. I mean, it could be so many different things. If it's controlling your life, don't let it do that. You only got one life. Let Jesus control it. He needs the one. Sam?
More spiritual stance on things like going by like the law
Okay, so he brings up the question of the death penalty. That's a interesting topic. Don't have time to get into it right now. I have convictions about what the Bible teaches about it, but it would take too much time to dig into that. That's a law of the land that you go to, and unless you're making the decisions, and none of us are in here for the land, we don't really have much to say about it. Now, if you have a conviction about it, you can allow that to influence your voting, but that's our only say. And if our country says no, we can't take it into our own hands and do yes, all right? And if our country says yes, and you can protest it, but you can't stop it. You know, so it's one of those rules that we can't do. And so each, you know, we have to, there's a lot of views on that, and there's a lot of strong views. And you go back to the first century, there's a lot of views on that. It's an interesting topic to look at. I said someone, Nikolai, and then we've got to finish in just a second, but I'll get your sense.
Going back to the abortion
Yes.
idea, and the reason I'm going back to it is Langley and I have had a discussion about it, like, you know, where do we sit? And a lot of times the answer for me has always been, I don't know. And so for like, and maybe you could shed some light into it a little bit, you hear of like high-risk pregnancies, you know, things where like the mother's life is at stake. It's, to me, it almost seems like a similar treatment. Well, a person receiving marijuana for seizures is getting a medicine for something.
Right.
The medicine for a pregnancy that is super high risk, looks like the mother may not make it, one of the things they go to is an abortion. How do you balance that out? And I think maybe the answer is ultimately it's an individual relationship with God, and we have to make that decision ourselves.
So he brings up a really challenging topic, and I want to bring this up, and I want to answer it first. Is let's say you're a woman pregnant, and you're going to live, or the baby's going to live, not both. What do you do? What does the Bible say? I don't have the perfect answer on it. I don't know. All right? That's the honest truth. But here's what we don't do. We don't make our beliefs based on the exception to the rule. We make our beliefs on the principle. And then when there's an exception that you don't know the perfect answer on, then you have to decide that situation and get advice. That's where wisdom comes in, and that's where things come in. But in 99.some% of the time, it's not a confusing choice. That's where judges are needed. That's where we need each other, because that's really hard. I don't know the perfect answer to that. I can see both sides of it. But almost never do we. I mean, most of the time it's really, really easy. Okay? So I think that's why, but you don't, my strong conviction is you don't make your beliefs based on the exception to the rule that rarely happens. You make your belief on what is right, and then when exception happens, then you do your best to do what God would want you to do. That's what you do. You know, let's say that person had 3 other kids that needed it, and the husband wasn't there all of a sudden, you know, what do you do then? I mean, so every situation is different, and I don't know the best answer in some of those situations because none of us do. But that's why we have each other and we have to think on that. Yes, ma'am.
It was the same, but it was in regards, it's the same topic on abortion.
Yes.
It's like in regards to like incest or rape or something like that.
Right.
Like to in a situation where, you know, that pregnancy may alter your life by trauma or PTSD, what have you.
So the question comes up in a situation with rape or incest or things like that, which is a real issue, okay? So again, I don't think you make the rules based on that situation. In my opinion, and I haven't been in this position, it's different than a life-threatening one because unless there's a life-threatening piece that goes along with it also, that child, yes, it would alter a woman's life for that period of time, but there are people who could adopt in that situation. I'm not saying that's the only answer. I'm just saying it's a little less of a difficult situation to me in that situation. But there's a Christian Family Services organization that does adoptions and things like that. So there's ways to help that without having to have a death to a life, you know. But it's still a very traumatic, very difficult situation. But again, I don't think you make a rule based on those exceptions. You make a rule based on the principles of the Bible. So I'm going to stop with that because That clock says it's 8, but I realize it's not. So I'm sorry. So I kept looking and said, man, I thought I was talking longer than that. And I was. All right, so let me just finish with a couple thoughts for you to think about. And these are just in general principles for you. Would you do it, whatever this thing is, with Jesus with you? If you don't feel comfortable doing that, you probably shouldn't be doing it. Would Jesus do it? Would you walk up on Jesus and say, he's doing that? Would you think you catch Jesus doing whatever? All right. Will it bring about righteousness? A really thing I see of maturity in people as Christians, how will this impact the kingdom of God? And then just a couple of practical things. What is the potential harm or benefit to my just being, even outside of your spiritual life? Does it hurt my body? Is it good for me? Now, we got this body to take care of, to do our best, right? So you look at it from that perspective. And so you take a look at each one of these things. So I want to close just with that Romans 12 verse again, because I think it's really, really critical to think this way. And I'm just going to read it. You guys heard it already. But the verse 2 says this: do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. We are supposed to continually be renewing our mind, not based on what the culture tells us to do, but what the scriptures teach us to do. The way to think, the way to live, the way to make our priorities, the way we treat our families, the way we pursue our future, the way we help other people. It's not based on what the world teaches. We have to conform our thinking to what the scriptures teach. And we have to be willing to change our mind, because there's not one mind in here who's perfectly spiritual. None of us. We're trying. And the more mature we get closer to that. But each person in here has to keep renewing their mind. Mine, yours, all of us. I've been doing it for a long time, and I still have some renewing. I know God's helping me to change things, right? Still. So keep that mindset. We're all learning this thing. Let's work together. Let's have the mindset that the principles of God are the basis of our life. Let's continually renew our mind, not letting the world conform us, but us helping maybe to help the world to conform to Christ, right? Thanks so much for your attention. Hope this has been stimulating for your brain. I love being with you guys. Have a great night and have an amazing worship Sunday.